Is universal basic income too expensive? One of the biggest misconceptions about basic income is that either it's too small per person and thus it's irrelevant, or it's too big per person and thus it's unaffordable. But in reality, the way that a basic income would be designed actually shows that the concern about cost is not as big of one as many people would think. So let's dig down deeper. A basic income system would have a built-in clawback, typically through the tax system. But there's many different ways that you can so-called claw back the basic income, which means that for those who are making a certain amount of money or getting other assistance, then there would be a way to get back a portion or all of the basic income. The majority of the clawback would fall on the wealthiest individuals. Mitt Romney's recent proposal for a universal basic income for kids demonstrates that people are starting to understand you can have a back-end clawback where at the end of the year you pay back a portion or all of your basic income if you make too much money. Why is this a superior way to set it up rather than on the front end? Number one, because you can immediately send out the cash. So if you have financial issues throughout the year, you don't have to apply. Number two, it reduces the upfront bureaucracy. You don't have to go and apply for the basic income. You will always get it, but on the back end, you might lose a portion if you are making a lot of money that particular year. And number three, this is beneficial because everybody gets it, and so the stigma associated with receiving the money would go away. So the clawback situation would be a way that you could pay for a portion of the basic income by taking back a sizable amount from the wealthiest individuals through the tax code. Another part of the clawback would be that as people rise out of poverty naturally under a basic income system, because you've pushed them well over the bubble, they would no longer need certain types of other assistance. So they would no longer have to get food stamps and housing assistance if the basic income was covering those things. One of the suggestions from Andrew Yang during the presidential campaign was allowing individuals to choose whether they wanted to keep their existing cash-like assistance or if they wanted to replace it with basic income. In my opinion, I would say you don't even have to let them choose. I would say give everybody the basic income and keep the existing programs because they would naturally be phased out as people no longer need them. So you can have that transition period where individuals, if they want those programs and they qualify for them, then you would allow them to get that. But if they no longer need them because basic income is helping them rise out of poverty, which I believe that it would, then those programs would naturally reduce in size, and thus you would have another way of clawing back some of the funds to pay for basic income. Now, the UBI clawback can be designed as an indirect clawback or a direct clawback. For example, the Affordable Care Act has a system where if you make too much money and you are getting healthcare subsidies, then you pay some or all of the healthcare subsidy back at the end of the year if your income exceeds a certain amount. A UBI system can create this type of phase out in the income tax system, as we saw with Mitt Romney's proposal for replacing the child tax credit. The higher income families would receive the funds, but at the end of the year, if they made more than $200,000, they would start to phase that out at the end of the year. Let's go back to Andrew Yang's proposal where he had the opt-in. It's likely that many wealthy families would just not even opt in to the basic income in the first place. So I would say that probably people like Bill Gates, for example, on the most extreme end, are probably not going to opt in to the basic income if that's an option. But I'd also say that it doesn't really matter either way if the top 1% are receiving the basic income, because you're not only taxing that all back, but you're probably taxing far more than the basic income through the design of the program. There are indirect ways that you can pay back portions of the basic income. For example, the value-added tax that was proposed by Yang as well. Now, there's a few problems with the value-added tax, including that it's a regressive tax, which means a larger portion of the poor's income is paid into a regressive tax, and it would essentially act as a national sales tax. And so you would pay back a portion of your basic income depending on how much you spend on particular taxed goods. There are ways to design a VAT to avoid some of the problems with being regressive. For example, you could target luxury goods in order to put a greater portion on wealthy individuals. You could exclude certain essential items or low-cost brands of items, etc. So there are ways to design it to have a less of an impact on the poor so that they're not paying a significant amount of their basic income back through the VAT. My preference for an indirect clawback would be through pollution taxes or carbon taxes. I think that we should design taxes that discourage activities that we don't want to have as much in the economy. So if we are taxing fossil fuels, for example, or if we are taxing highly polluting goods, for example, I think that that makes a lot of sense because those externalities are effectively being compensated by the individual who is purchasing that item, and then they're paying back into the UBI system so that everybody can benefit. And this also has the side benefit of discouraging those activities that we don't like. So perhaps we would see a lower amount of pollution, a lower amount of carbon, as it incentivizes companies to find more environmentally friendly ways of producing those goods. It is important to note that any taxes paid on the UBI would be used for the following year's dividend, meaning much of the money is repeatedly recycled through the system. The additional amount that's redistributed to lower income families is what's called the net cost, or the real cost of basic income. The net cost is the amount the government would actually redistribute every year under universal basic income. So this is the common misconception, is that most folks, when they talk about trillions and trillions of dollars for basic income, they are looking at the gross cost, which doesn't factor in the clawback mechanisms where higher middle income and high income families would pay back a portion or all of their basic income back into the system. And this means that real resources are not being used in the economy. If I give you a dollar bill and you give me that dollar bill back, there was no resources used in the economy. There wasn't any loss of resources, which means that all of the existing resources still exist. So when people say that universal basic income costs trillions of dollars, this is misleading because it's shuffling around the money, giving it to the wealthy on one hand and taking it back through the other, and no new resources are used during that exchange for the most part. So when you factor in the clawback, the real cost of basic income is far lower. It's about $500 billion annually, according to Georgetown professor Carl Widerquist. This is less than 25% of existing entitlement spending. And there's a lot of authors like Scott Santens who point out that the benefits of basic income would basically pay for themselves multiple times over by eliminating child poverty, eliminating adulthood poverty. All of these things come with enormous costs to society, such as crime and lack of education, etc. So we're basically helping build the economy, and we should see it as an investment and not a cost. So a universal basic income would, in reality, cost about the same as a negative income tax when factoring in the clawback. But the sticker price of the gross cost is what creates the false impression that UBI costs so much more. However, a negative income tax, where people are phased out if they make too much money on the front end, which means you wouldn't receive it if you're making a certain amount over the threshold, then it looks like it is cheaper because you only count that front end cost. Whereas the people who are saying UBI is too expensive, they're not looking at the back end clawback. So I asked Andrew Yang a couple of years ago when I interviewed him whether or not he would support negative income tax as a way to kind of get around this false impression, and he said that, in fact, an NIT would be a step in the right direction. My view is that Mitt Romney's plan with the child cash transfer is absolutely the right direction, in that it works through the Social Security Administration and it is truly universal, so that we have all seniors are essentially getting the universal retirement fund, and now all children will have a guaranteed assistance through the government. Then we can start to build in the middle, so that we have the elderly and the very young who are getting assistance, and now we can start to move the needle and get adults to have assistance as well. So my opinion is that we should work towards a universal system where the back end is where the clawback happens, and that means that we focus on feasible solutions first, which means that I think we start with this child cash assistance and we push to make it 18, 19, 20, and expanding the people who are eligible for that type of universal assistance. So at the end of the day, a universal basic income is completely affordable in the United States. It's just a question of how it's designed. The US already spends trillions of dollars on entitlements, and the real cost of basic income would be a fraction of that amount. At the same time, the guaranteed nature of universal basic income would effectively eliminate poverty in the United States. Millions of people who are on the edge of poverty would now have this opportunity where they can lift themselves and pursue the passions that they are most interested in. They can pursue productive endeavors and productive activities, whereas now they're just barely surviving. So basic income pays for itself and then some by opening up the economy and allowing every single person to participate. So when we look at the cost of any program, we should look at it of whether or not the benefits outweigh the costs. And from basic income, we should see that it's actually an investment in the future of the United States by eliminating poverty once and for all. So I'm interested what everybody thinks about this. I know that there's a lot of controversial opinions about the cost of basic income and whether or not it's just going to cause the elimination of superior welfare programs. And certainly that is a concern, that some might use this as an excuse to get rid of programs that are actually beneficial. So I'm curious what everybody's opinions are. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks.